Danny Cole opened his eyes and tasted blood in his mouth. The emergency lights were flickering red above him, and the smell of burning metal filled his lungs. He tried to move, but his body screamed with pain. Something heavy was pressing against his chest. He pushed it away and realized it was a piece of the cockpit ceiling that had collapsed during the crash. He sat up slowly and looked around at what remained of his cargo hauler. The ship was destroyed. Sparks flew from broken wires and smoke poured from the damaged engine compartment at the back. Through the cracked front viewport, he could see dense jungle vegetation pressing against the glass. Trees with purple leaves and thick vines surrounded the wreckage like curious animals examining a dead thing. Danny pulled himself to his feet and stumbled toward the emergency supply locker. His left leg was bruised badly, but nothing seemed broken. He had been lucky. The reactor breach had given him only seconds to reach the escape pod controls, but the pod had malfunctioned, and he had been forced to attempt a manual landing instead. The fact that he was still breathing was something close to a miracle. He opened the supply locker and checked what had survived. 2 weeks of ration bars, a water purification tablet container that was half empty, a basic medical kit, a portable scanner, his toolkit which he always kept close because a salvage engineer without tools was just a man waiting to die, and one emergency beacon that was cracked down the middle and refusing to power on no matter how many times he pressed the activation button. Danny sat down on an overturned crate and allowed himself 1 minute to feel sorry for himself. 1 minute to acknowledge that he was stranded on an unknown moon with limited supplies and no way to call for help. 1 minute to think about his sister back on Earth, who would be worried when his ship failed to arrive at the colony. Then the minute was over and he stood up again. He was from Earth. His ancestors had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and predators that would make most alien species faint with terror. The galaxy called humans because they came from a planet that seemed designed to kill everything on it. Danny had grown up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, where winter temperatures could freeze a man solid and summer brought wildfires that ate entire forests. He had worked salvage operations on asteroid fields and toxic moons and the burning deserts of 442b. He was not going to die on some jungle moon just because his beacon was broken. He gathered his supplies and stepped out of the ruined ship into the thick, humid air of 7. His scanner told him the atmosphere was breathable but heavy with moisture. The gravity was slightly lower than Earth standard, which would make moving easier. Temperature was warm but not dangerous. He could survive here if he was careful and smart. The first 3 days were spent exploring the area around his crash site. Danny found a stream about half a kilometer to the east and identified several plants that his scanner confirmed were not poisonous to humans. He built a simple shelter using pieces of his wrecked ship and large leaves from the purple trees. He rationed his food carefully and supplemented it with fruit that tasted like a combination of mango and soap, but provided enough calories to keep him going. On the 4th day, he decided to expand his search radius. If there was any chance of finding something useful on this moon, then he needed to cover more ground. He packed a day bag with water and rations and his toolkit and set off toward a series of low hills he had spotted to the north. The jungle was alive with sounds and movement. Small creatures that looked like 6-legged lizards through the undergrowth. Flying things with transparent wings buzzed past his head. Once he spotted something larger moving through the trees in the distance, but it did not approach him and he did not investigate. He was not looking for trouble. He climbed the first hill and found nothing interesting. The second hill was the same, but when he reached the top of the third hill, he stopped and stared at what lay in the valley below. There was a crater there. Not a natural formation, but something created by impact. The trees had been flattened in a circular pattern around a central point, and even after what looked like many years of regrowth, the scar on the landscape was still visible. And in the center of that crater was something that made Danny's heart beat faster. It was a machine, a construct of some kind that stood nearly 8 feet tall even though it was partially collapsed and half buried in dirt and vegetation. It had a shape that was vaguely humanoid with 2 legs and a torso, but it possessed 4 arms instead of 2, and its head was a smooth dome covered in optical sensors that were dark and lifeless. Strange symbols were carved into its metallic skin in patterns that flowed like water frozen in mid-motion. Danny approached carefully. His scanner was going crazy with readings. The machine was old, incredibly old. The device estimated its age at approximately 3,000 standard years, which meant it predated human space travel by more than a millennium. But here was the truly remarkable thing. Despite its age and obvious damage, the machine was still drawing power. A faint energy signature pulsed from somewhere deep within its chest like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. He walked around the construct and examined the damage. Something had hit it hard. Weapon fire from the looks of the scoring on its armor. The chest plating was cracked open, and he could see internal components that were damaged and leaking a luminescent blue fluid that had long since dried into crusty trails down the machine's torso. Several major conduits were severed and hanging loose. One of its 4 arms was nearly torn off, and another was missing entirely. Danny knelt beside the ancient machine and studied its wounds the way a doctor might examine a patient. He had spent 15 years of his life repairing broken things: mining equipment, cargo ships, military vessels, orbital stations. He had fixed machines that other engineers had declared beyond saving. He had brought dead systems back to life with nothing but spare parts and stubbornness. This was just another broken machine. A very old and very alien broken machine, but still just a machine. And Danny Cole fixed machines. He set down his toolkit and opened it up. He pulled out his diagnostic scanner and began mapping the damage. He traced power lines and identified failed components and calculated what would need to be replaced and what could simply be repaired. The work would be extensive. It might take days. He would need to cannibalize parts from his own wrecked ship to replace things he could not fix. But he had nothing but time and nowhere else to be. Danny selected a tool and got to work. The jungle sounds continued around him as the sun moved slowly across the alien sky. Somewhere in the crater, a human knelt beside an ancient guardian and began the long process of bringing it back to life. Neither of them knew yet how much that decision would change everything. The work was harder than Danny had expected. The alien technology was unlike anything he had encountered before. The components were arranged in patterns that seemed to follow a logic he did not fully understand, and the materials were composed of alloys his scanner could not identify. But Danny was patient and methodical, and he refused to give up. On the first day, he focused on understanding the machine's basic systems. He traced power lines from the core to the extremities and mapped out the primary circuits. He discovered that the construct used a form of energy he had never seen before. It was not electrical exactly, but something more complex, something that flowed through the machine like blood through veins. On the second day, he began repairs on the power distribution network. Several major conduits had been severed by whatever weapon had brought the machine down. Danny could not replicate the alien materials, but he found that copper wire from his own ship could serve as a temporary substitute. The connection was not perfect, but it would allow power to flow again. His hands were burned by the second evening. The alien components generated heat when he worked on them, and he had no proper protective gloves. He wrapped his palms in strips of cloth torn from his spare shirt and kept working. Pain was just information. It told him he was still alive. On the third day, he tackled the damaged chest plating. The machine's torso had been cracked open by weapon fire, and several critical internal components were exposed to the elements. Danny fabricated replacement plates from the hull of his wrecked ship. The metal was not as strong as the original alien alloy, but it would provide protection. He worked through the night by the light of a portable lamp. Sleep pulled at him constantly, but he pushed it away. There was something about this machine that fascinated him, something that made him want to see it whole again. It was not just professional pride, though that was part of it. There was something else, a feeling he could not quite name, as if the machine was waiting for him, as if it had been waiting for 3,000 years for someone to come and fix it. On the morning of the fourth day, Danny reconnected the final power conduit and stepped back. He had done everything he could. The machine was still damaged in ways he could not repair. One arm was missing entirely and another was barely functional. Several secondary systems remained offline, but the core was stable and the primary circuits were intact. He reached out and placed his hand on the machine's chest where he had installed a new activation switch salvaged from his ship's control panel. He took a deep breath and pressed it. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then a soft hum began to emanate from deep within the construct. The luminescent fluid that Danny had thought was dried and dead began to glow faintly. Blue light pulsed through the visible conduits like water flowing through pipes. The optical sensors on the domed head flickered once then twice then came alive with steady azure illumination. Danny stepped back quickly as the machine began to move. Its joints creaked and groaned after a stillness. Its remaining arms twitched and then flexed. Its legs shifted and found purchase on the ground. Slowly and deliberately, the ancient construct rose from the crater floor where it had lain broken for 3,000 years. It stood at its full height, and Danny had to crane his neck to look up at it. The machine was impressive. Even damaged and incomplete, it radiated a sense of power and purpose. Its movements were smooth and precise like a dancer testing limbs after a long rest. The domed head rotated until the optical sensors were pointed directly at Danny. Blue light washed over him, and he felt a tingling sensation as the machine scanned him. Then a voice emerged from somewhere within its chest. The voice was deep and harmonic. It resonated in the air like the sound of a bell being struck. "You have restored this unit." Danny nodded slowly. He was not sure what he had expected, perhaps for the machine to attack him, perhaps for it to simply walk away. But conversation had not been high on his list of possibilities. "Yes, I did. You were in pretty bad shape." The machine's sensors pulsed as it continued to scan him. "Your biological signature indicates origin from a high-gravity world with elevated radiation levels and extreme environmental variance. Class 12, hazard rating on the Galactic Habitability Scale. You are what other species refer to as a..." Danny shrugged. "That is what they call us. I prefer human." "Human?" The machine seemed to consider the word. "This unit has encountered references to your species in archived data. Warnings were distributed to all outposts regarding potential contact. Your kind was classified as dangerously unpredictable, violent, untrustworthy. Contact was to be avoided." Danny felt a flicker of irritation, but he kept his voice calm. "I just spent 4 days repairing you. Does that seem violent or untrustworthy to you?" The machine was silent for a long moment. Its optical sensors dimmed and then brightened again as if it was processing something complex. "No, it does not. This unit must recalibrate its threat assessment parameters." Glad to hear it, Danny relaxed slightly. "So what do I call you? Do you have a name?" "This unit is designated Sentinel. I was constructed by the Collective to serve as a guardian of their colonial territories. My primary function is protection of designated assets and personnel." Danny looked around at the empty jungle. "I do not see any assets or personnel here, just trees and bugs." "The Collective no longer exists." His voice carried something that might have been sadness, though Danny could not be sure if the machine was capable of such emotions. "Their civilization collapsed approximately 2,700 standard years ago. This unit has been operating without direction since that time." "Operating? You were lying in a crater for 3,000 years." "This unit was damaged in combat against hostile forces who sought to extract resources from this moon. Self-repair functions were insufficient to restore primary systems. This unit entered emergency stasis to preserve core functions." There was a pause. "This unit calculated a 0% probability of recovery without external assistance." Danny smiled slightly. Guess you got lucky that I crashed here. Luck is an imprecise concept that implies random chance plays a meaningful role in outcomes. However, this unit acknowledges that the circumstances of your arrival have resulted in a favorable outcome for this unit's continued operation. Danny laughed. It was the first time he had laughed since the crash. Close enough. He looked up at the ancient guardian standing before him in the alien jungle, a machine built by a civilization that had died before humans had figured out how to make fire, a machine that had been broken and abandoned and forgotten, a machine that was now alive again because a stranded salvage engineer had refused to walk past a broken thing without trying to fix it. Danny did not know what was going to happen next. He did not know if the machine would help him or leave him, or simply stand there processing data until its power ran out again. But he knew one thing for certain. His situation had just become a lot more interesting. The days that followed were unlike anything Danny had experienced in his 15 years as a salvage engineer. He had worked with alien technology before. He had traded with species from a dozen different worlds, but he had never spent time with anything like. The Sentinel was a remarkable creation. Despite being 3,000 years old and severely damaged, its knowledge base was vast. It knew things about the galaxy that human scientists had never discovered. It understood physics and engineering and biology in ways that made Danny feel like a child playing with building blocks, and yet it treated him with something that resembled respect. They established a routine over the first few days. Danny would wake at dawn and eat a small breakfast from his dwindling rations. Did not need food, but the Sentinel would stand nearby and watch him eat with what seemed like curiosity. Then they would work together on repairs and survival tasks. The Guardian's remaining sensors proved invaluable for finding resources. Could detect water sources from kilometers away. It could identify which plants were safe for human consumption and which contained toxins that would kill him within minutes. It could sense the approach of predators long before Danny would have noticed them and guide him away from danger. In return, Danny continued to repair and improve the Sentinel's damaged systems. He restored functionality to the second damaged arm. He reinforced the replacement chest plating with additional layers of scrap metal. He cleaned and adjusted the optical sensors until they glowed with renewed brightness. The work gave him purpose and kept his mind focused on something other than his uncertain future. They talked while they worked, or rather talked, and Danny listened with growing fascination. The Sentinel told him about they had been a peaceful species, tall and slender with silver skin and 6 eyes that could see across the entire light spectrum. They had built a civilization that spanned hundreds of worlds and had lasted for 50,000 years. They had created the Sentinels to protect their people from the dangers of an unpredictable universe. But even the greatest civilizations fall eventually. A plague had swept through space, something that attacked their unique biology with devastating efficiency. Within a generation, their population had dropped from trillions to millions. Within 2 generations, they were gone. Only their machines remained, sentinels like wandering empty worlds with no one left to protect. It was a sad story, and Danny found himself feeling sympathy for the ancient guardian. 3,000 years alone, 3,000 years without purpose or direction. It was a kind of loneliness that he could barely imagine. You said you were damaged in a fight. Danny was adjusting a connection in the Sentinel's shoulder joint as he spoke. What happened exactly? Raiders. His voice carried a hard edge that Danny had not heard before. A species called They came to this moon to harvest rare minerals from the subsurface deposits. This unit attempted to prevent their extraction operations as per standard defensive protocols. By yourself. This unit was designed for individual operation. The anticipated scenarios in which Sentinels would be required to function without support. Danny tightened a bolt and moved to the next connection. How many raiders were there? 47 combatants supported by 3 armed vessels. Danny stopped working and looked up at the Guardian. You fought 47 raiders with ship support by yourself. Affirmative. This unit neutralized 31 hostiles before sustaining critical damage. The remaining forces departed after determining that continued engagement was not cost-effective. Danny shook his head in amazement. That is incredible. You must have been terrifying. This unit was fulfilling its designated function: protection of assets and territory. The damage sustained was within acceptable parameters for mission success. Danny returned to his work, but his mind was churning. He had known the Sentinel was a combat machine, but he had not fully appreciated what that meant. They had built something truly formidable. Even damaged and 3,000 years out of date had held off an entire raider force. That night Danny sat by a small fire he had built near his shelter, stood nearby as always. The Guardian did not need warmth or light, but it seemed to prefer staying close to Danny. Perhaps it was just following protective protocols. Perhaps it was something else. "Can I ask you something?" Danny stared into the flames as he spoke. "You may ask. Do you ever get lonely? Being the only one left, I mean." The Sentinel was quiet for a long moment. This unit does not experience emotions in the way organic beings do. However, this unit has noted certain operational inefficiencies that arise from extended isolation. Response time slow. Processing becomes less efficient. There is a degradation of function that cannot be explained by physical deterioration alone. Danny nodded slowly. "Sounds like loneliness to me." "Perhaps." His optical sensors dimmed slightly. This unit was designed to protect others. When there are no others, the core purpose becomes undefined. It is difficult to describe in terms that would translate to organic experience. "I think I understand." Danny poked at the fire with a stick. "I have been alone for most of my career too. Salvage work is not exactly social. You spend months in space by yourself traveling between jobs. You learn to keep yourself company. Yet you chose to repair this unit, when doing so provided no obvious benefit to your survival." Danny shrugged. "I fix broken things. It is what I do." The explanation is insufficient. Repairing this unit required significant resources and effort. Resources that could have been used to improve your own survival situation. A purely rational actor would have prioritized self-preservation. Danny looked up at the Guardian. "Maybe I am not purely rational. Maybe I just saw something broken and wanted to make it whole again. Maybe I thought you deserved a second chance." Sensors pulsed with that strange blue light. This unit does not understand the concept of deserving. It implies a moral framework that was not part of programming. Danny smiled. "Then maybe that is something I can teach you." He did not know it then, but those words would prove more important than he could have imagined. Because in the days to come, he would need more than just a repaired machine. He would need a partner, and would need to learn what it truly meant to protect someone worth protecting. The fire crackled and popped in the darkness. The jungle hummed with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, and somewhere in orbit above them, 3 ships were already making their approach to the moon called Seven. The had returned. Danny was asleep when detected the incoming vessels. The Sentinel's voice cut through his dreams like a blade. "Human, wake immediately. Hostile contacts detected in upper atmosphere." Danny was on his feet before he was fully conscious. Years of working in dangerous environments had trained his body to respond to alarms faster than his mind could process them. He grabbed his toolkit by instinct and looked toward the sky. What is it? What is happening? 3 vessels matching raider configuration are descending toward this location. Energy signatures indicate weapon systems are charging. Estimated time to landing is 14 minutes. Danny felt his stomach drop. The raiders, the same ones who had nearly destroyed 200 years ago, they must have detected the Sentinel's restored power signature. They had come back to finish what they started. How many? Sensor resolution is limited due to damage. estimated 30 to 40 combatants based on vessel capacity. Danny ran through his options. They were not good. He had no weapons except a makeshift plasma cutter he had jury-rigged from salvaged parts. He had no ship. He had no way to call for help. And he was facing a force that had nearly destroyed a fully functional Sentinel. "We need to move, find somewhere to hide." Negative. His voice was flat and certain. This unit's energy signature can be detected from orbit. Concealment is not possible. The hostiles will locate this position regardless of where we relocate. Then what do we do? The Sentinel turned to face Danny. Its optical sensors glowed with steady blue light. "You will flee. This unit will engage the hostile forces and provide covering fire for your escape. You will proceed to the eastern ridge and find shelter in the cave systems this unit detected during earlier sensor sweeps." Danny stared at the Guardian. "You want me to run, while you fight them alone?" Affirmative. This unit is designed for combat. You are not. The logical course of action is to maximize the survival probability of the organic asset. I am not an asset. Danny felt anger rising in his chest, and I am not leaving you here to be destroyed again. Your emotional response is counterproductive. His voice remained calm, but there was something underneath it, something that might have been confusion. This unit's survival is not a priority. Your survival is the optimal outcome. Not to me, it is not. Danny turned and started gathering materials. He worked quickly and with purpose. A broken power cell from his ship's backup system, copper wiring, a cracked focusing lens from an old scanner, salvaged capacitors. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he assembled the components into something that resembled a weapon. "What are you constructing?" asked. Equalizer. Danny connected the final wires and hefted the crude device. It was heavy and awkward, but the power cell hummed with stored energy. Not much, but better than nothing. That device is improvised and unreliable. The probability of malfunction is significant. Then it will fit right in with everything else about this situation. The Sentinel's sensors flickered. Danny had learned to read those flickers as expressions of confusion or surprise. This unit does not understand your behavior. You have no obligation to defend this unit. You have no tactical advantage. You will likely die. Danny looked up at the ancient Guardian. "Probably. But I did not spend 4 days putting you back together just to watch you get torn apart again. If we go down, we go down together. That is how it works." "How what works?" "Being partners." Was silent for a long moment. Then its voice came out softer than Danny had ever heard it. "This unit has never had a partner." "Well, you do now." Danny checked his improvised weapon one more time. "So let us figure out how to not die." They climbed to the ridge above the crater and found a defensible position among the rocks. Danny could see the clearing below where the raiders would likely land. It was not a great position, but it was better than standing in the open. The ships descended through the clouds like metal predators. 3 vessels with combat damage and covered in crude markings. They touched down in the clearing and their boarding ramps dropped open. Figures began pouring out. They were reptilian, covered in dark green scales with yellow eyes and mouths full of sharp teeth. They carried plasma rifles and shock batons and moved with the confidence of predators who expected easy prey. Danny counted them as they emerged. 32, 33, 34. 34 hostiles confirmed, reported, superior numbers and firepower. Recommendation remains unchanged. You should flee. Danny raised his improvised weapon and sighted down the crude barrel. Recommendation noted and ignored. The raiders spread out across the clearing. They were searching for the energy signature, looking for the source of the power reading that had brought them back to this moon. One of them shouted something in a harsh, guttural language and pointed toward the ridge. They had been spotted. The first plasma bolt sizzled through the air around Danny's position. He ducked behind a rock and felt the heat of the shots passing inches from his head. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Stepped forward. The sentinel's remaining arm spread wide and its optical sensors blazed with bright light. A sound emerged from its chest. Not words, something deeper, a harmonic tone that made Danny's bones vibrate. The raiders hesitated. Some of them recognized what they were facing. Danny heard shouts of alarm and saw several of them backing toward the ships. They remembered what the Sentinel had done to them 200 years ago. But their leader was screaming at them, forcing them forward. There were only two targets, one damaged machine and one soft human. They had numbers, they had weapons. They could take them. The charged. Danny stepped out from cover and fired his improvised weapon. The plasma bolt caught the lead raider in the chest and sent him tumbling backward in a spray of sparks. The weapon hummed and Danny fired again. Another raider fell. But there were so many of them. They were everywhere. Plasma fire filled the air like deadly rain. Danny moved and ducked and fired and moved again. His body acted on instincts he had not known he possessed. Instincts inherited from ancestors who had survived every predator Earth could throw at them. He was and did not go down easy. A bolt caught him in the shoulder. Pain exploded through his body and he spun and fell. His weapon clattered away across the rocks. He tried to rise, but his arm would not respond. 3 raiders were closing on his position. Their weapons were raised. Their yellow eyes gleamed with anticipation. Danny watched them approach and prepared to die. Then moved. Danny had seen fast things in his life. He had watched racing ships tear across asteroid fields at impossible speeds. He had seen predators on a dozen worlds strike with lethal quickness, but he had never seen anything move like moved in that moment. The Sentinel crossed the distance between them and the approaching raiders in less than a heartbeat. One moment it was standing behind Danny. The next moment it was among the enemy. Its 4 arms became blurs of motion. Metal fists connected with reptilian bodies and sent them flying through the air like discarded toys. The raiders did not even have time to scream. The 3 who had been about to kill Danny were down before he could blink. Then 5 more fell. Then 7. The Sentinel moved through the raider formation like a storm through dry leaves. Unstoppable, devastating, beautiful in a terrible way. Danny watched from the ground as plasma bolts hammered into his chassis. The weapons that had nearly destroyed the Sentinel 200 years ago now seemed to have no effect at all. Blue light blazed from the Guardian's optical sensors, and energy crackled across its surface. Something had awakened within the ancient machine, something that had been dormant for 3,000 years. The raiders broke. Those who could still move turned and fled toward their ships. They trampled each other in their desperation to escape. Their leader was screaming at them, but no one was listening anymore. They had come expecting easy salvage. They had found something else entirely. Did not pursue. The Sentinel stood motionless as the surviving raiders scrambled aboard their vessels and lifted off. The ships rose into the sky trailing smoke from damaged sections. Within minutes they were gone, swallowed by the clouds, fleeing back to whatever dark corner of the galaxy they had come from. Danny tried to sit up and gasped as pain shot through his wounded shoulder. His shirt was soaked with blood and his vision was starting to blur around the edges. He needed medical attention. He needed it soon. The Sentinel turned and walked toward him. Its optical sensors were still glowing with that intense golden light, brighter than Danny had ever seen them, brighter than anything he had installed or repaired. "You are injured." Danny laughed weakly. "Good observation." Knelt beside him. 2 of its arms reached out with surprising gentleness and examined the wound. The human had been struck by a plasma bolt. Tissue damage was significant but not fatal if treated promptly. "That is reassuring." The Sentinel looked at him for a long moment. Its golden eyes seemed to hold something new, something that had not been there before the battle. "You protected this unit." Danny winced as he shifted position. That was the plan. You were wounded because you did not retreat when this unit instructed you to do so. I told you, partners. Was silent. When it spoke again, its voice was different, softer, more like a person and less like a machine. No organic has done this for this unit in 3,000 years of existence. The created sentinels to protect others. We were never meant to be protected ourselves. It was not part of our programming. It was not part of our purpose. Danny looked up at the ancient guardian. Everyone needs someone watching their back, even guardians. Yes, the Sentinel's optical sensors pulsed with warm golden light. This unit understands now. Lifted Danny gently in two of its arms. The movement was careful and controlled. The Guardian held him like something precious, something valuable. Then it began walking toward the raider landing site where the enemy ships had been. Where are we going? The hostile vessels departed, but they left equipment behind. Medical supplies, communication equipment. This unit will locate these resources and treat your injuries. Danny closed his eyes. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, but the pain seemed distant now. He felt safe in a way he had not felt since crashing on this moon. He felt protected. The Sentinel carried him through the battlefield, past the bodies of fallen raiders, past scorched earth and destroyed equipment. The jungle was quiet around them. Even the creatures seemed to sense that something significant had happened here. This unit must tell you something, spoke as they walked. Go ahead. The programmed guardians to protect those who cannot protect themselves. This was our core directive, our fundamental purpose, but you have demonstrated something the never anticipated, something they never included in our programming. What is that? That sometimes they are the ones worth protecting. Danny opened his eyes and looked up at the ancient guardian carrying him through the alien jungle. The golden light in its optical sensors was warm and steady, not like a machine anymore, like something more, something that had learned a new way to be. Thank you, Danny said quietly, for saving me. This unit should thank you. You saved this unit first. You gave this unit a second chance, a new purpose. His voice resonated with harmonics that sounded almost like emotion. This unit will not forget. They reached the raider landing site and found the supplies they needed. Medical equipment that sealed Danny's wound and administered painkillers. Communication gear that could broadcast a distress signal strong enough to reach passing ships. Within hours, a rescue vessel had detected their transmission and changed course. Danny stood at the edge of the clearing and watched the rescue ship descend through the clouds. His shoulder was bandaged and his strength was returning. Beside him stood motionless, watching, waiting. Come with me, Danny said. The Sentinel turned to look at him. This unit does not understand. Come with me, Danny repeated, off this moon. Into the galaxy. I could use a partner out there, someone to watch my back. This unit has no purpose beyond this moon, no directive, no mission. Then make a new one. Danny smiled. That is what I did when I crashed here. Sometimes you have to find your own reason to keep going. Was silent for a long moment. Its optical sensors flickered with complex patterns of light, processing, considering, choosing. When the rescue ship landed and the boarding ramp lowered, Danny walked forward to meet the crew. Behind him, he heard the heavy footsteps of metal on stone. He turned and saw following him, moving toward the ship, moving toward a future neither of them had expected. The Sentinel's optical sensors glowed with warm golden light. This unit accepts your proposal. This unit will be your partner. Danny grinned. Welcome to the team. They boarded the ship together. The human salvage engineer and the ancient guardian. Two broken things that had found each other in the wreckage. Two survivors who had learned that the universe was less lonely when you had someone to face it with. The rescue ship lifted off and carried them away from Seven. Below them, the jungle moon grew smaller. The crater where they had met became a speck. Then it was gone, lost in the green expanse. But what they had found there would stay with them forever. A partnership forged in desperation and tested in battle. A friendship between species that had never been meant to meet. A reminder that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy hope could still be found. All you had to do was fix something broken, and have the courage to stay when running was easier. Danny Cole looked out the viewport at the stars stretching into infinity. Beside him stood Guard, watching over him, protecting him. The Guardian, partners at last. And their adventure was just beginning.